So Lynda, we've just talked about relationship property and the differences in terms of trust property. So now we're going to talk about the Hague Convention. So for our viewers, what actually is the Hague Convention?
Well, it's interesting because New Zealand used to be known as the Kidnappers' paradise. So what would happen is that people would move there or take their children, secrete their children from the country of origin and move to New Zealand. And then New Zealand judges would say, oh, this is such a great place to live, we're going to look at your custody situation now from a New Zealand point of view. And so what happened was that there was then the Hague Convention came in, which is a convention which says that when the issues of custody should be dealt with in the country of origin, so that people then don't just kidnap their children, take them to somewhere else, set up a new life for them there, and then try and litigate in that country, which was happening a lot. So the Hague Convention came in, which said that unless there were very specific and quite hard reasons not to, the country of origin would deal with questions of removal of children.
Well, I mean, do you find with the pandemic that your
really,
cases have escalated in this
Absolutely.
respect?
So let me just explain what happens in a Hague Convention case. So say for example, you're living in New Zealand and you suddenly, out of the blue, decide to take your children and move them to Australia. Then if the Hague Convention is activated, the New Zealand government then bring you back to New Zealand. It's done through the central authority, so the central authority will bring you back to New Zealand, and then then you will have to have a case in New Zealand as to whether you are actually entitled to move to Australia rather than just doing it unilaterally. So it's actually a very important convention. The problem with the pandemic is that people's lives are now so dysregulated that we are seeing more and more cases where people who have been living in one country, for example, a lot of people want to come to New Zealand now. They want to bring their children to New Zealand, and they may want to do that against the wishes of their other party, especially when they separate. So we are seeing more cases about the Hague Convention arising, and they are difficult cases. But the golden rule really is that you have got to get agreement from the other parent before you move your children away from their home environment, away from their country.
And it's got to be a written agreement.
And it's got to be a written agreement. And if you don't do that, then you absolutely are at risk of having your children brought back, forcibly brought back, and then the case being litigated there.
So these cases, I would assume, end up being very long-winded.
They are very traumatic because there's always a big winner and a big loser. Because, for example, I've had cases where people move, for example, there's a big case going through the New Zealand courts at the moment with a woman who brought her daughter from Germany. Well, you can imagine that if it's not very easy to just go and have holidays or school holidays in Germany if you're living in New Zealand.
No.
So it really, what the courts are concerned about is that it really effectively extinguishes the relationship between the children and one of their parents. And that is seen as being very harmful,
alienating, really,
to children. And so, I mean, we've got cases. There's cases in New Zealand where people want to move, for example, between Auckland and Dunedin. Even that will have a big impact on the relationship between a child and the parent that is no longer with them. So the courts take those cases very seriously, particularly in the Hague cases. Quite frankly, the golden rule is you're going to be brought back to your country of origin and you can litigate it there. So it's much better to actually come to some agreement or don't go, quite frankly.
Lynda, what advice would you give to people who are facing this scenario right now in their own family?
My biggest advice, Bridget, is that you must go and get advice from a family law specialist in your local area. Don't try and do this or make this big decision by yourself. It's a specialist and difficult area, and you really need to have competent advice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. How can people get hold of you?
My chambers are Bastion Chambers in Auckland. You can get me through my website or through my email address, which is just ljkearns@bastionchambers.co.nz, or of course you can get hold of me through Bridget.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Lynda, for coming
Thanks very much, Bridget.
and talking about this, because it's a really pertinent issue, and believe it or not, it affects a lot more families than you think. So no, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bridget.